used to be able to do that. I can't do that. So this is over the Incarnation of Christ and verses 14 through 18 of John 1. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known." So this word incarnation refers to this event, and it can sound kind of like a highfalutin word. It can sound like a really theological word, and it is, but it's not that uncommon. We see this idea of incarnation in other words. I don't know how many of you have ever eaten chili con carne, but all that means is chili with meat. And that carne is from the same sort of root as incarnation. I'm sure you've all heard of the idea of reincarnation. Reincarnation is the belief that when we die, we're reborn as something else. To be reincarnated is to be made flesh again, and in a different sort of flesh. Of course, we don't believe in reincarnation, but we do believe in the incarnation, which means to be made flesh for the first time. And that's what happened with Jesus. Reincarnation is not what we're talking about with the birth of Christ. And reincarnation, as I said, says to put something in fleshly form into another fleshly form. But incarnation, however, means to place something in fleshly form for the first time. And that is the case of the incarnation. Jesus existed before he was born, but he had not been in a body, in a fleshly body. So this was the first time that happened. This is what the Christmas story is all about. So let's talk about the meaning of incarnation. It means in fleshly form. And so scripturally, when Jesus became flesh and blood, when he became a human being, then that's when the incarnation occurred. And when verse 14 says that the Word was made flesh, it means that Christ became flesh. Christ became human. God, who is spirit, had never been in fleshly form before this time, had never been a human. So for the first time, the Word, God, became flesh. And that is Christmas. That's the point of Christmas, not Santa Claus and not gifts, but the greatest gift of all, the gift of Jesus. And so he was God incarnate. That's the theological way of saying it. He was God in the flesh. So he was a true human being. And it says it this way in John 1:14, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glories of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." But he was truly a human being. He was not a theophany. Theophany is probably a new word to you, but before Jesus was born in Bethlehem, God had never appeared as a human being, but he had appeared in other ways. He had appeared in theophanies. Theophanies are a visible but not physical appearance of God. And a number of times to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses, he appeared in visible form, but not in the flesh. Can you think of an example of that? Yeah. The pillar of fire. God, it was visible, right? And it was God, but in the pillar, but he wasn't a human being. Yes. The burning bush is another one. We have a number of times when God came to his people visibly, but not in the flesh. In Bethlehem, however, Christ actually became a human being. The incarnation doesn't mean that God dwelled in man, but God became a man. It wasn't like a possession sort of thing, that God took possession of a human body. Or somebody else's human body. He was literally God. He became a man. So here's another kind of theological way of looking at it. Jesus became what he had not been before. He had not been in a human body before. So he became what he had not been before, but he never ceased to be all that he has always been. He was still God in the flesh. So Jesus, in coming to earth as Jesus of Nazareth, did not give up his deity. He was still God. He did not cease to be God. So in John 1:14-18, it says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." And I talked to you about that word in the Greek. That word is skinu. It's kind of a cool word. And that word means to pitch a tent. The tabernacle was a tent, right? But basically what it's saying is that in the Greek, it would literally say that, and Jesus pitched his tent right by ours. So the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He pitched his tent right next to ours. When the Word became flesh, God became a man. And so we see this word tabernacle, and so we're going to make some comparisons to the physical tabernacle built by the Israelites, and then Jesus as the one who pitched his tent among us. And we're going to see how they're to compare and contrast them. Some of these are better than others. One I'm going to take a little bit of a exception to, but we'll talk about that. So the ancient, everybody familiar with the ancient tabernacle? It's where the Jews worshipped when they were wandering in the desert. God gave them the schematics for building the tabernacle, and that's where they would worship. That's where they would sacrifice. The tabernacle had an outer court where people could go. It had an inner part that was the holy place, and then it had even another part that was the most holy place where God's presence dwelt, and nobody could go in there except the high priest one time on the Day of Atonement to atone for the sins of the people. And even he had to make sure his sins were atoned for, because if he went in there and his sins weren't atoned for, then he would die because he was in the presence of God. And so they put a little rope around his foot in case, he died while he was in there, and, somebody would he died. Both of them would die, and it would just be a really bad scene, like from some sort of Indiana Jones movie. So they made sure that they made precautions for going in there, because that was the only time anyone could. And so here's some kind of comparisons. The tabernacle was temporary. The tabernacle was never intended to last forever, and it didn't. Because ultimately, the Israelites would build and I don't know if this is exactly what it looked like, but it's like what one person thinks it looks like. That's the altar in front. They would get to Jerusalem and they would build a temple, a permanent place to worship God. And so it was always intended to be temporary. And like that, like the tabernacle, Jesus was only on earth for 33-ish years. We don't know if it's 31 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, but somewhere in the 30s. And so he was only incarnate on earth for a temporary amount of time. Now, this is the one that I take exception with. Outwardly unattractive. I don't know about the tabernacle, if it was ugly or not, but nowhere in Scripture does it tell us that Jesus was ugly, that he was outwardly unattractive. He may have been. I don't really care whether he was attractive or not, but this is what I know. This is the verse that they used to say that he was unattractive. For he, this is a prophecy of Messiah, so therefore a prophecy of Jesus. For he grew up before God, like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. That's not saying he's ugly. What it's saying is that he was an ordinary-looking guy. People, like, you see the paintings of Jesus, especially like the ones from the Middle Ages, and he's glowing, and, he's tanned, and he would have been dark-skinned. And, his hair's blowing in the wind, or whatever it is. And he wasn't special. There wasn't a halo above his head. Everybody went, wow, what's up with you? He looked like an ordinary Jew. He was probably very short. He was probably about my height. And he would have had dark hair and dark skin, just like all the Jewish men, probably a big nose, just like any other Jewish male. No, they didn't. People look at him and go, oh, that's the Messiah. He was an ordinary-looking man. So I wouldn't say that he was unattractive. He was ordinary, and the tabernacle was pretty ordinary too. And it's not really important anyway. So the next one is that it was God's dwelling place. It was the place on earth where God's Spirit dwelled. That's the Ark of the Covenant. That's the sort of mock-up of what they think it looks like based on the description in the Bible. And between those two cherubim is where was the mercy seat, the Holy of Holies, the place where God dwelt on earth. But during those 33-ish years, Jesus was the place where God dwelt. God became a man, and Jesus tabernacled among the people.
How would he receive?
How would what?
How would God receive?
Well, he's a spirit, so he's not going to get uncomfortable. Okay? So his presence was there, but he's not, it wasn't a physical presence. He did at times, though, even though he looked like an ordinary Jew, he did at times flash his glory. And one of the most picturesque of those incidents where he flashed his glory was the Transfiguration. They were up on this mountain, Peter, James, John, and Jesus, and they're just there with Jesus, hanging out with Jesus. They don't know what's about to happen, and all of a sudden, Moses and Elijah show up, and they're glowing, and Jesus is glowing, and he's glorified in a way that he hasn't been before. And my guess is they were like freaking out, like what is going on here? And so Peter, being Peter, I love Peter. I identify with Peter. Just starts talking. Because he just doesn't know what to say, and like, wow, great, yeah, okay, this is happening. Hey, should we build some huts for Elijah? They might need a place to stay, and Moses, Elijah need a place to stay. So should we do that? And he didn't know what to say, and they were freaked out by that. And this is what John's talking about when he says, and later in John, that we beheld his glory. We saw how glorious he was. So, and in that moment, he didn't look like any ordinary Jew. He didn't look like any ordinary human at all, because he was showing some of his glory. His glory would again be displayed both in his crucifixion and resurrection, but people didn't always recognize that either. So the tabernacle was the place, and I don't even know what this means because I do my own thing here, so you don't have to worry about that picture. But is where God met man. The tabernacle was the place where God met man. This is what Exodus 25, 21, and 22 say. It said when Moses was getting the directions to build the tabernacle, God said, "And there I will meet with you, and I will communicate with you." And Moses would go into the tent, and he would communicate with God, and he would come out glowing. And at one point, when he went up on Mount Sinai and he communed with God, he came back, and the people were like, "Whoa, we can't handle that!" And he had to put a veil over his face because he was shining so much. So this is the place. This was the place. The tabernacle was the place where God met men. When Jesus was on earth, he was the place where God met men, but he is still the place where God meets us. So here's the picture I want to give you rather than that one. I don't think he's that happy. So this is humans right here. This is a holy God. It's a triangle for the Trinity. And every religion ever devised, the point is that how are you? Well, we bless.
Yes, you do.
Yes, I do. Oh, it's a blessing just seeing this little guy. This is Mordecai. Say hi to Mordecai. Mordecai came to bless me. Yes. I'll be right back.
Thanks, Mordecai.
Thank you. Use the drink right now. Pays to be a teacher. So sorry about that break. So here's the thing. Every religion in the world tells people how they can get to God. Whatever God is for them, whether that's nirvana or, heaven or whatever it is, how you can do that. And every single religion says the same thing. You do this, and you do this, and you do this, and you don't do this, and this, and this, and you can make yourself good enough for God. You can earn your way to heaven. Now, the do's and don'ts may change a little bit, but all of it says, every religion, except for Christianity, says that. And the truth is that we can't. So let's pretend that we take a field trip to the Grand Canyon. And I don't know, who do I know? And Kelby has a great idea. Kelby says, you know what? I'm feeling strong. And this is the narrowest part of the Grand Canyon. Why don't we long jump it? And of course, I'm just stupid enough to say, yeah, let's go. So, and I go first because, I'm the leader. So I go first. And here I am. Right? Here I am.
Here I am. I'm probably more like this. Okay, and then I run. Okay, I run, and I take this big old leap, and I go. And Kelby's like, yeah, right. She probably couldn't have done that, but I can do this. I'm a lot stronger than Mrs. Keyser, so I can do this. And he runs fast, and he goes. We both end up in the same place, don't we? I mean, he's a little farther there than I am, but neither of us can long jump the Grand Canyon because we just can't do it. And human beings are tragically flawed and can't be perfect and can't reach God. One of the reasons I believe Christianity to the core of my being is it's the only religion on earth that begins with a truth. You can't do it. So God did it for you. The only way we can reach God is through Christ. And because of Christ, we can know God. And we can, guys, I don't want you talking. Whatever you have to say, it's not as important. And every person on earth is tragically flawed and incapable of getting to heaven. And we need Jesus. We don't like admitting that we need him, but we literally can. That's it for today.